You're not going up there.
Will you bow with me, please, as we pray for our speaker? Lord in heaven, thank you for Bruce, and thank you for the work he does for this church and for this community. And Lord, we ask that you bless his words and bless this congregation as we listen. Help these words to touch our hearts, touch our lives in a way that's meaningful to you and to further your kingdom, Lord. It's in your Son's name that we pray. Amen.
Thank you. David was nice to me in that prayer because he's feeling guilty. When they started kind of passing around the list of who would speak on different days and whatever, I said, well, I'll take the 29th of April. So I had that on my calendar. And David saw the email. And he goes, okay, we'll put you down for that day. Well, about 3 days ago, Betsy sends me an email. Are you ready to speak on the 15th? I think I'm on the 29th. So David was sent back. He's very apologetic. If you can't do it, we'll find somebody else. I said, nah. What's the deal? What's better than a CPA talking on April 15th? So anyway. So it's fine. But anyway, my name is Bruce Nunley for you visitors that are here. No, I'm not a minister. I actually am a CPA. Been an accountant feel like I've been an accountant all my life. But anyway, I volunteered to speak and speak today. It's just kind of odd that it did turn out to be the 15th. So, and by the way, here's your little piece of advice for the day. Just because it's Sunday, you actually have till Tuesday to pay your taxes if you hadn't paid your taxes, or make your first quarter estimate or whatever. So if you thought, oh no, I missed it, you hadn't missed it yet. But don't worry, don't call me Tuesday at 5 o'clock in the afternoon. I'll file an extension for you, but that's about all I'll do. All right. So when I actually speak before to a lot of CPAs, to a lot of accountants, because I do a lot of continuing education training in accounting. So being up here in front of you is not odd to me, because in fact, I'll be in Atlanta on Friday speaking to about 300 or 400 people at a conference there. But talking about accounting is a lot different than talking about what I'm going to talk about today, so it is different for me. But I thought, well, I can try to get up and act like a preacher. And then I thought, well, that's exactly what I'd be doing, is acting like a preacher. And so acting like a preacher. So I thought, why don't I just try to give some biblical principles or some thoughts, and that's really part of the reason why I'm standing down here, is I thought, I don't want to preach, I just want to talk to you. And I'll just use some financial examples in the Bible and just kind of talk about how my experience kind of gives me whatever insight. And I'm going to tell you from the beginning, a lot of what I'm going to be talking about is really just opinion. And so if I say I think this or I think that and you don't agree with me, that's fine. But at least maybe we can think about some stuff, right? All right, Adam. Let's go to the first one. All right, so here's my 3 topics. And I'm going to just say a few comments about interest, really interest expense, and taxes, and then wealth. Okay, Adam. Next. The first slide I got up here has nothing to do with any of those topics because, again, because these topics somewhat come up in the Bible, they give a story, they give an example, they might say something, but still, like I said, I think there's a lot of leeway maybe, there's a lot of judgment, there's a lot of things that we're going to have to decide for ourselves. And so many of you, when I've talked communion thoughts or other things, I've used this verse that's behind you right now. And I think in a lot of our discussion when we talk about financial things, we have to, in my mind, this is what we should use as our principle. And so when it comes to money, when it comes to other things related to that, then our principle should be, is what we are doing, is what I am doing, you know, is this to show my love for the Father? And or is it something that shows my love for my neighbor, loving them as much as I love myself? And so in other words, I showed this slide first because I'm going to be using this as kind of my principle on some of the things that I tell you. Okay, Adam, next. So this first one is out of Deuteronomy, this verse, and it talks a little bit about interest. And I find this an interesting story in this little thing in Deuteronomy, because there's a couple of things there. In the beginning of this verse, it says something about money or other things. In other words, back in that time, it wasn't just money. People didn't deal in currency as much. They would do a lot of things based on stuff, you know. And so you think about that in these types of transactions. So the neighbor comes over to his neighbor and he goes, look, I had a bad crop this year. I don't have enough grain to get through the winter. Can I borrow a bushel of grain for the winter? And the neighbor goes, sure, here you go. And so then the neighbor goes, well, you know what? I gave you a bushel, or I'm letting you have a bushel, so next spring, how about a bushel and a quarter, or a bushel and a half? And so I think it was, you know, we don't deal in those types of things. But anyway, this lesson to the Jewish people from God, this law, was don't charge your fellow Israelites interest. And of course, say, you know, if it's a foreigner, go ahead, charge them some interest. But if it's your fellow Israelites, now why would God have said that, really? Why would he have made the distinguish, you know, shouldn't we be nice to everybody in a way? Well, I guess the way I look at this, loaning something to them to make a profit off of them. You're loaning them something because they have the need. And therefore, you know, don't benefit yourself off of their need. And I do think probably back in those days that people didn't ask to borrow stuff unless it really was a big need. So of course I deal with clients who go, well, you know, I just borrowed $1 million to get the 10,000 square foot house because my 8,000 square foot house was too small. And I'm thinking, wow. But anyway, so you know, maybe that situation is probably a lot different than these situations that we had in the Old Testament. People were borrowing things, or if they borrowed something from their neighbor, it really was for a need. And so God, I think, was telling them, don't take advantage of your fellow country people. We need to be unified as we move into Canaan. All right, Adam, go to the next slide. Now, actually, although I just had him put this slide up, you don't need to go back to the last one. But does that apply to us today? I don't, you know, it's the Old Testament law. I don't think it necessarily does. But what's the principle? The principle is if we have somebody here at this church or you know, a brother or sister somewhere who has a need, why would we ever think, oh, sure, I'll loan you something, but, you know, I need to get something back, need a little extra. Why would we ever really want to do that? Is that really showing love for God or for, you know, our neighbors? I got to tell you, when I first moved here 25 years ago, I needed $5,000. I was renting a house, and we'd been in the house for about 9 months, and then the guy who owned it said, I'm moving out of the area, and I don't want to own this house from distance, so you either need to buy it or move out. And I liked the house, and so, but I didn't have any money. I didn't have any money. So I call my dad. I go, I need $5,000 for down payment. I said, if you will give me $5,000, I will pay you back in a year. I'll pay you, actually it was $6,000, because I said, I'll pay you $500 a month for a year, you'll have it back. He goes, yeah, I can do that, no problem. And I go, great. He goes, I'll send you the check. I go, great, Dad, and I'll start sending you the check beginning whatever. And then he goes, whoa, wait a minute. He goes, I'm earning 4% on that money in the bank. All right, Dad, I'll pay you 5%. Okay, good. So anyway, but I wish I'd have known this verse better back then. I would have called him on that. So I paid him interest. All right, on this next slide, I think this is one of the most beautiful little groups of verses in the Bible. I really do. There are so many great points to this, just these 3 or 4 verses right here. Because yes, they actually would there was collateral, security, whatever you want to call it, for these loans. And listen, look at this great story right here, because I just think this is beautiful. So God says, okay, you've loaned your neighbor something, and they've promised you, they've pledged it with some sort of security. I think in this verse he's actually, they're talking about their cloak or their coat is what they've pledged as security. So it says now they can't pay. Your neighbor can't pay. And so you're going to collect the security, to receive it, to receive the collateral. And what's the first part? Don't go in their house. Don't go in their house to get it. Isn't that a beautiful statement? No, not charging in. Here's the kids and everybody all sitting around. Give me your jacket. You didn't pay me? I want your jacket. No, you stay outside and let the person come out to you and give you the security outside the house. And then, here's another little thing. This is just a little twist that I think is great. They could have written the story like, when the neighbor comes out with the jacket, you go, no, forget it, fine, no problem. But I thought, no, in the story here, no, you take the jacket and you go home. So what does that do? That gives that neighbor the feeling that they completed their obligation. They said, I want to borrow money or whatever, and if I don't pay, you get the jacket. And so that gave them their dignity of saying, here's my jacket. I couldn't pay, you take it. And so you take it and you go home. But as you see later in the verses, it says, don't go to bed that night with that person's jacket. Take it back to them. Because obviously, if they couldn't pay, they probably need the jacket a whole lot more than you do. And so take the jacket back to them. Don't even keep it for a day. Don't even keep it for the night. Take it back. And what does the end of this verse say? Then they will thank you, and it will be regarded as a righteous act in the sight of your Lord. Isn't that a great little story? I mean, that's not only just talking about here's the way you handle things, but it's saying you do it where that these people can have dignity, and you can do the right thing, and it can be a winning situation in an uncomfortable situation. So I love that little story. All right, so what do we take from this little part on interest? I just take the part that in any transaction like this, we need to treat each other as understanding. It can't be a business transaction with each other. It needs to be something that we're doing out of love and concern. And you can't treat your brothers and sisters like you might treat other people in this situation. Now, I take it a step further, and this will be up to you. What do we say? What did Jesus say in the New Testament about who is our neighbor? The pool got a little wider when Jesus started talking about who our neighbor was. I'll let you think about that yourself. But anyway, I just think the lesson from this is, in our transactions with each other, we have to be very careful and very, it's not just whatever's in a contract. Let's just do what's the right thing. I'll make one side comment of this, and this is a little bit dangerous sometimes, but I also say, and I don't really have much example about this, so it's not like I have some sore feeling in the back of my history of something, but I just think we need to be careful in business transactions with each other anyway. You know what I mean? There was one situation. I had just moved to Dallas out of college. It was about 1980, and we went to a big church in Dallas, and there was this guy there who had made a lot of money. He was about 3 or 4 years older than me, but he had made it in a multi-level marketing business type arrangement, and he'd gotten in on the ground floor, and he was raking it in. And so he took me to lunch, and he goes, you work for that accounting firm, probably barely making minimum wage. If you would get in on this deal with me, you can really make a lot more money. I go, I don't think so. It's the last time I think he talked to me. We all went to the same church. I think it was the last thing he ever said anything to me. I just don't think he was happy that I didn't take him up on this situation. And so, I do have a little bit of a sore feeling about one situation in that one, but I just think we need to be careful in business transactions with each other. I won't say don't do them. I don't think that's the answer at all. I just say we have to be careful. All right, next slide. Now we're going to talk about taxes. All right. first, a little background. There's two main taxes that they talk about in the New Testament. There's the Roman taxation, and then there's the temple tax that the Jewish religion had. Now, the Roman taxation was this series of layers. You talk about a corrupt tax system. You know, the IRS is Mother Teresa compared to the Roman tax system. But this corrupt tax system you can imagine just exactly how they did it. So you had somebody in Rome who was the head of revenues. And then that person had 7 or 8 people in all the regional places that Rome controlled. And then those people had people under them. And those people had people under them. And so you had these layers of tax collectors. And as you can imagine, so Rome would say, we need $10 million. So the head guy goes, okay, all you folks, I need this much from you, this much from you, this much from you, this much from you. And so they would all just kind of pass down how much they needed. Well, where did it start? So Ashton here, I need $100 from Ashton. That's what I need to send to my next guy is $100 and so I go, Ashton, I need $150. And Ashton gives me $150. I put 50 in my pocket, send the 100 up the chain. Now, obviously, it'd be a lot more than that because once it got to the next guy, he takes his 20 out of it, and he gets up to the next guy, he takes his 20 out of it. So the head guy at Rome gets $3 of Ashton's 150. So what did the Roman government do? We're not getting enough. We need more. And so it just built and built and built and built. Now, historians believe that Matthew the apostle was probably one of the lowest levels of the tax collector people. You know, in other words, way down at the bottom. He was probably a local tax collector. And, you know, I've thought it's kind of funny before, you know, when it came to the disciples who kept the money, it was Judas. You know, I bet Matthew was really good with money, but I'm sure the other apostles were like, no way, we're not letting that guy keep it. He's a tax collector. But anyway, he was probably at the lowest level. Zacchaeus was probably at a level above him. Zacchaeus was probably one of the people who had a lot of tax collectors under him. But this Roman system was, you know, complicated, and it was totally corrupt. Very little of the money that they collected actually was, you know, used for what it was intended. It mainly went in the tax collectors' pockets. So here was the situation. These religious leaders decided they wanted to try to trick Jesus. They thought they had him trapped because the coins back then actually had Caesar's picture on them. By the way, although this really has nothing to do with the situation, in Judea, where Jerusalem was, the Romans actually taxed there. They taxed the individuals. Up in Galilee, where Jesus spent much of his time, they weren't actually taxed up there. That's where Herod was, and Herod paid tribute to the Roman government to be able to be the king up in Galilee. And so Herod had his way of trying to get money from all the Jewish people that were under his rule so that he could pay the tribute. But the Jewish people up in that area didn't think that was so revolting because they were giving their money to another Jew. And that was his problem that he was giving it to the Romans. But down in Judea, where they were actually taxed by the Romans, they thought, oh, this is horrible. And there were many of the Jewish religious leaders who actually said, because it's got Caesar's picture on the coin, it's really an idol. And so you shouldn't even deal in Roman currency. That's idolatry. And so here we've got these religious people that come up to Jesus and they say, we're going to trap him right here. So here's the Roman coin. So should we pay taxes to Caesar? Do we have to pay taxes to Caesar? And of course, he says, look at the coin. Whose picture's on it? Well, it's Caesar. Well, render unto Caesar what is Caesar's, and what is God's, what is God's. And so how are they trying to trap him? Well, if he says, yes, pay your taxes, well, then the Jewish people could say, oh, well, you're supporting this horrible government. You're even committing idolatry to say that we should give this coin to the Romans. And so you don't care about the Jewish people, you're supporting the Romans. If he said, no, don't pay him, then essentially he was committing treason to Rome, and he could have been killed right there on the spot. But anyway, in a way, they did kind of have him in a box. And I don't know that he necessarily evaded the question, but he said, look, okay, just pay him. It's your tax, give him the money. Now, well, I'll get to that point in a second. Show the next slide, Adam. Now, this one, of course, relates to the temple tax, this situation. So Jesus and his apostles go in the temple, and there's this tax due. It was like a drachma or 2 drachmas, I guess, that they were supposed to pay each person. And this is probably when we saw the widow. There's the story in the widow where she comes up and she didn't have enough for the full tax. She just put her little mite, or whatever that says in the scriptures, just her penny in the box. That's all she had. And Jesus said, look, she's given everything she had. But this was the temple tax, and this had been around for some time. Quite frankly, the religious leaders in the Jewish religion were making a lot of money off the temple tax too. Some people say that in Jerusalem back in those days, the biggest homes on the side of the mountain were of the rabbis and the religious leaders. So there was probably a lot of corruption there too. And of course, Jesus was much harder on the religious leaders than he was on anybody else. But anyway, so he comes, they say, hey, does your teacher pay the temple tax? And they go, yeah. And he just says, hey, Peter, go ahead, catch this fish, reach in the fish's mouth, and you'll find our payment. And Peter finds a 4 drachma coin, and Jesus says, go pay the temple tax. Now, both of those stories are a little strange in a way, but the point that I get from that, quite frankly, if you were hoping for something radical, you're not going to get it from me. The point I get from that is, pay your taxes. I don't see a lot of guidance in the Bible that would say pay your taxes unless, or pay your taxes as long as. Jesus just paid them. He didn't really talk about it. Now, so what point do I get from that? What lesson do I get from that? Jesus' mind was not on that subject. That was unimportant to him, quite frankly. What was important to him was what he was teaching and what he was trying to do for people and what he was trying to do for God. And that's what was important to him. Trying to figure out how not to pay taxes was not his concern. That was an earthly issue, and he dealt with spiritual issues. Yes, I have heard people come in my office, not anybody that goes to this church, but I've heard people in my office say, I don't agree with what the government's doing. I think it's wrong. I think it's sinful. So I'm trying to do everything I can to just evade, literally, not pay my taxes. And I've had people come in and go, of course you can read anything on the internet these days. I've read that if you just don't file for X number of years, they'll lose your, well, yeah, I don't think that's a good idea. But I don't think I should have to file. When I lived in Dallas, there was a group of American airline pilots who formed a church so that they wouldn't have to pay taxes. And so they had all their income going through there, and they said, oh, it's just a church. And the IRS got them pretty hard. So what is my takeaway from this? Well, unfortunately, my takeaway is I think you just need to pay your taxes and focus on what's important. Now, I got one other little takeaway from this, and here's where I'm kind of skidding off into some other area. I think another lesson that possibly can be learned from this topic is that, maybe we focus too much on the earthly stuff and taxes and politics and all that kind of stuff, and it knocks us, it's in our face so much nowadays. And maybe that tends to distract us from what we really should be focusing on, spending our time on, study and doing. I'm just going to say this, tell you my story. You don't have to, You can think I'm crazy if you want to. I used to watch Fox News almost every night. And I would have it on and have it on. I remember one, I forgot, it was about 5 years ago. And the topic they were discussing, and I was like, this is horrible. I can't believe our government's doing this, blah, 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 blah. And I was just getting all ramped up about it. And after watching it, I thought, how can MSNBC ever be, saying I switched over to their station, and I hardly ever did that. And after watching it about an hour, I went, that's horrible. Fox News has it all wrong. It's not real. And so then I thought, I'm just hearing stuff. I'm just hearing noise. I don't need to watch this that often. There's better uses of my time than to just sit around with the TV on getting aggravated. And you read the headlines. In today's world, when I see a headline, when it says outrage or insane, I usually think there's no sense reading this because somebody's making a mountain out of a molehill. But the headlines, they love to do it. I'll start to give an example, but I won't. So anyway, that's my point on that. Is maybe I'm not telling you can't watch the news, and I'm not telling you which station you should watch if you do watch the news, or read the paper, or read the news online, or whatever it is you do. But I'm just saying we can really get ourselves riled up about stuff that is not as important as what the reason we're here in the first place. And that time, like my wife over here, that she might be watching the news instead of spending time with her grandson, she chooses her grandson. That's why my wife is smarter than me. Most of the time. All right. However, as we close the tax piece, show the next slide, Alan. When I was in college at Harding University, and this would have been about 1977 or so, in my tax class, my tax professor read this quote, and I have always remembered it. I don't know why, but this is what I learned in tax class. And this guy was by the way, I did a little research on this guy. He was a judge, but he was not a Supreme Court justice. He was like in a circuit court somewhere, kind of in the New York area. But it said politically he was a Republican for a while, and then he was a Democrat for a while. So he didn't have any necessarily political leanings. But as you can just see from this quote, he basically said, look, there's no reason why you should pay any more taxes than you have to. Pay what you have to pay, and don't pay any more than that. And there's nothing that says that you need to pay your government extra money that they don't deserve. And so I thought, you know what, that's pretty good advice. And that's what I tell people when they come to me, to talk about their taxes. I got this money and this, and, I don't think I should have to pay tax on that. Well, that's income. I'm afraid you're going to have to pay taxes if I'm going to do your tax return. Well, can I deduct the cat? Well, not if I do your tax return. So you know what, just pay your taxes, and I don't want you to pay. And I'll have people, I'm not giving you advice. I have people come up to me sometimes and they go, I gave $100 to this charity and I never got a receipt, so I can't take the deduction. And I say, I would take the deduction. If you gave the $100, take the deduction. If you get audited, they may throw it out. But if you honestly gave the $100 to a real charity, I'd take the deduction. That's what I say, because I think you're just doing you're doing what you did. You're taking a deduction for what you did. Don't make up deductions, but anyway. All right, Adam, next slide. We're going to close this out with a bang. Well, that print's kind of small, but we're just talking about wealth for just a second. Now, I've got two stories which you're both of them you're familiar with. You see the first one. This is what we refer to as the rich young ruler. And I like this story. Now, I don't think in Mark's version they actually said he was young. In Matthew's version, I think it's Matthew's version, they did say, yes, he was young. So he comes to Jesus. He says, I keep all the commands. I do all this. What must I do to inherit eternal life? And of course, after they have a little bit of conversation, Jesus says, well, you're doing pretty good, but now let me tell you what you need to do. You need to sell everything you have and give it to the poor and come follow me. And the guy walked away. And it's a sad story, because in this version of the Gospels, and that's the reason I used it, it said Jesus looked at him and he loved him. Isn't that a great insight? I think Jesus looked at this kid and he goes, thinking, I think Jesus looked at him and said, he's smart, he's a hard worker, he does all this kind of stuff. He could be such a great disciple in my kingdom. But here's the way I see, this is what I think Jesus saw. I think Jesus saw this guy loves money. It's not just that he likes to make money or something. He loves money. And he's using all of his skills just to get more money. Now, I call that greed. And I think that's what Jesus saw. And I think Jesus, when in talking to this young man, was like, if you want to follow me, you can't come follow me with this level of greed in your heart. You can't, because all you will think about is making more money. Now, I hope everyone in this room is sitting there going, what? Are you telling me this kid was just obsessed with money? Yes, that's what I believe. Why do I believe it? Because I've seen it. In my business, I've seen it a lot. And at first I just thought, well, that's just the way the people are. Now it kind of really gets on my nerves, because there are people out there who look at it this way. I've got this much money and I just want more. And then I just want more. And when I get more, I just want more. And if I have to run somebody over to get more, I'll run somebody over. If I have to take this little bitty business that's just getting started and do something to put them out of business to get more, I'll get more. I just want more. And of course, those are the people we go, what's enough? It's not a matter of what's enough to them. They just love it and they just want more. I hope nobody in this audience today is one of those people. If you are, stop now. Figure out a way to get that out of you. That is greed, and it's horrible. It's horrible not just because you're trying to get more money. It's horrible because you're taking advantage of people. You'll lie, you'll steal, you'll kick people down. You'll do whatever you can just to get more money. And I'm afraid that's what this problem was with this young man. Now, next slide. The second one I've got here is about, I think this is a completely different case. This is the old guys in the world, like me. This is the one where this guy just said, oh, I just had a great year. I had a great year. I just doubled all our crops or whatever it is. I'm going to build more barns, build more silos, put all this grain in there, and then I am going to eat, drink, and be merry, because tomorrow I might die, and I am on Leisure Street, and I am in good shape. He wasn't thinking, I just want more. I got 6 barns, I want 12 barns. And then I get 12 barns, I want 25 barns. He wasn't thinking that. He actually said, I got enough. I don't need you anymore. I'm just going to sit back and have fun the rest of my life. Just take it easy. Now, in the prior story, Jesus didn't just knock the kid down dead. I think he probably hoped that this kid someday would realize, I'm going down a bad path. But look what happened to this guy. And of course, this is just a parable. The other one was an actual story. This is a parable. But what happens to this guy at night? Bing! Now, what do I think? Why do I think God told the story this way? Because the way I look at it, he said, look, if you don't care about anybody else at this point in your life, if it's only you and there is no need for anybody else, then there's really no need for you. Because I put you on this earth in order to love me and to love your neighbors as yourself. And if you do what you say you're going to do here, you're doing neither. So you're not significant anymore. I know I'm being harsh maybe the way I say that. I'm paraphrasing, but I think that's kind of what that story's trying to say. So, the way I'm going to close today is just building off of that a little bit. And that is, a lot of us in this room, we do have some younger people. Younger people in the room, don't be greedy. Don't be like the rich young ruler. I've seen it too many times in my career, and here's what I normally see in it. they get to be about 60 or 70 and they go, where are my kids? Where's my spouse? Where are all my friends? And it's not a happy ending a lot of times. So if you're young and you're just thinking, I want it all, just keep on working and bringing in more money, change that attitude now. There's a lot of people in this room that are a little older. And you go, if I just had this much, I could just sit back. When I was working in Dallas in my 20s, I was making about $30,000 a year about age 25. And I thought, if I could get up to 70,000, I would be set. Well, I got up to that much at one point, and and it didn't stop. The ladder kept going up. But how much is enough? I don't know. But so this is kind of my advice in closing. My cousin, I have two cousins that are like brothers to me. One of them got me into jogging, and one of them got me into accounting, and I'm not sure which one I dislike the most. But the one who got me into jogging gave me this book about 10 years ago called Finishing Well. And it's written by a guy named Bob Buford. Bob Buford owned a telecommunications cable companies and sold it for, thanks Adam, and sold the company for jillions of dollars. And he was somewhere between 45 and 50 years old. He was a Christian. And he was like, I got all the money I could ever use. What do I do now? He retired after he sold the company. And so he started thinking about it. And here's statistically, I looked this up the other day. My dad was born in the 20s. The average life expectancy for a guy who was born in the 1920s was 56 years old. No, excuse me, 54 years old. 54 years old. Now, that was just the average if you were born in that time, 54 for a male. When I was born in the 50s, the average life expectancy was now 67. It had gone up 13 years. If a kid who's born now, the average life expectancy is somewhere around 74, 75 years old. So we're all living longer. Now, they started Social Security back a long time ago. When could you start? 65. Most of the people who, when they got eligible for Social Security, they died. They were either dead before they ever got to that age or pretty soon after. Well, now people are living longer. So Social Security Social Security keeps getting squeezed and squeezed and squeezed. I'm not telling you shouldn't be saving money for retirement. I think you should. I really do think you should. Because there's another verse in the Bible that we didn't have I didn't put on the slide, and that's in 2 Thessalonians, where it says, man doesn't work, he shouldn't eat. And so I personally believe that it is important that we should not be a burden to each other or our families. So yes, I think because we're going to live longer, I think it's important, quite frankly, to have money set aside for some retirement. I'm not saying you're wrong if you don't. I'm saying you might have a tough time. But my mother used to tell me, oh, my church friends will take care of me. I go, Mom, your church friends don't want to take care of you because you're difficult. I said, they probably will, but you're difficult. And so John and I are going to have to take care of you. And she goes, well, I don't want you all to take care of me because y'all are mean to me. And I go, well, Mom, I'm sorry, we're going to take care of you. Well, she didn't need our money. But anyway, we took care of her. But, that's my own opinion. And how much is enough, that's a whole different subject. And there's lots of things you might need money for than others. That cousin who gave me this book, his deal was, he's got a daughter who's severely challenged. She has to live in a home. She's never walked. She's never done anything. He's got in his will enough money to be able to, that she will be taken care of after he dies. There's lots of things that might be important. I like a lot of what these rich people are doing nowadays, where they're pledging a lot of their money in their will to certain charities and things. Those big hits to a charity can do great things. But anyway, lastly, and again, this book, what Bob Buford said was, because so many people are making money at an earlier age and then being able to retire and then having not just 2 or 3 years, but 20 or 30 years of continued living, his point is move from success to significance. And that's what I encourage all of us to be thinking about now. And he's not just talking about money. He's just talking about the fact that our life expectancy is going on, to move from success to significance. This book is stories of about 100 different people. Some of them had a lot of money, some of them didn't have a lot of money, who he felt like he interviewed them and they moved from success to significance. Joanne's going to be mad at me. I talked to Joanne last Sunday. Didn't you win Teacher of the Year before in Walton County? Just shake your head yes, right? Okay. Joanne Dardar over here, when she was teaching school, which is what you did pretty much your whole career, right? And she won Teacher of the Year in Walton County. She was successful, absolutely successful. I was talking to her last week. I said, Joanne, what are you doing now? She goes, I just spend most of my time mentoring people. I'm on the phone with people all the time. They're asking me, what should I do now? What should I do here? What should I do now? And she goes, I'm just talking to people and just trying to help them get through whatever it is they're dealing with. You know what? Joanne has gone from success to significance. And I mean that. And so, that's the kind of stuff I think we need to look at. We all need to finish well. Nobody remembers who was leading the game at halftime. Always remember the one who won. My first race when I was jogging, I was in Dallas. My first was a 10K race. I went down about 4,000 people. My very first race, and I thought, well, I want to do good. I got right up to the starting line. Now, 8-minute mile would have been fast for me. They started the race. It was like a NASCAR race taking off, and it's like I was in a little go-kart. I mean, people practically knocked me down getting by me. I got to the first mile. They're calling out the time. 6 minutes and 30 seconds. I can't run that fast. I just got caught up in the crowd. By the 5th mile, I was gasping so hard, somebody who weighed about 3 times more than I did came jogging right by me, and I just quit. I stopped. I just walked the rest of the way. I didn't finish well. Well, so I learned a lesson. Start at the very back. All you'll do is pass everybody else the whole time. You won't have any great times, but it'll be a lot more rewarding. And it was. I passed people the whole way after that. That's why I run all my races. Well, I quit running races now because I'm too old. Anyway, I want us all to finish well. There may be somebody here today who maybe they hadn't got off to a good start at all. Maybe you need to start. Maybe you're at the starting line. And if you're in that condition, then we would like you to come maybe talk to some of our shepherds, or are you both going to be here, or are you going to be in the back? Either way. You can go to the back and meet with one of our shepherds, or you can meet with one of them up here. If you just need to get a start, or maybe you're at that point where you've had a start, but it hadn't been a good one, and you're worried about a finish, and you're worried about following God, and you're worried about doing what He wants to do, and you want to be that person, and so you want to finish well. And so if that's your need, you might just want to pray to God from where you're standing as we sing a song. You might just want to pray to God yourself. Or maybe you want to come up here and get some prayers for the whole church. And if that's what you would like, we'd be happy to do that. But we're going to have this song of invitation. And again, either just where you are, or if you feel like you need to come forward, please do so as we stand and sing.